composting is a powerful thing, and it's nourishing. It's nourishing for ourselves as stewards of the earth to have our hands in the soil and our hands in um, the life of the soil with the compost. And it's transformational for the soil that we inoculate the compost with and the plants that get to interact and feed off that soil and work with that compost. So we are, I think we're privileged to have an understanding about the power of compost, and we are deeply blessed to have people like Jesse Weiser come into the room and share his insights about composting and compost extracts and vermicomposting and so I just want to invite you to just notice where your own personal growth edge is in this conversation. Are you deepening into wisdom that you already know? Are you learning something here to learn something brand new? And just notice where you're at on your own personal journey and how you can really take the time that you spend here and compost that into your next brilliant steps and deepening into your own personal wisdom as a steward of the earth and of your life and your relationships. And with that, I want to invite you to welcome Jesse Weiser from Hiwassee Products. Hiwassee Products has been a sponsor of Heart and Soils this year, and we're deeply grateful to be amplifying their awesome, awesome products and services that they do for Gaia, our Mother Earth. And so Hiwassee Products, he's not here to talk about his products today. He's here to talk about composting. The great thing about Hiwassee Products is it's all about composting, compost, vermicompost, making compost, and making compost extracts. And he's actually had Dr. Elaine Ingham work with the compost extractor and to see the efficiency of it. And she, if you look on YouTube on their channel, you'll see that she actually talks about the extractor that they have and how efficient it is and how she was really excited about it. So we are deeply honored to be amplifying the work that they do as composting stewards. And Jesse is a part of their team, and he's really passionate about helping farmers put life into their soil through composting and helping them move away from using chemicals and helping them really transform the way that they are farming, and not just from a place of of building a business for Hiwassee Products, but from a place of literally changing people's lives, helping them save money and not having these massive chemical bills, helping them improve their health through moving away from using the things that are harming and hurting the soil and the earth. So Jesse comes in with a full heart and a lot of grassroots curiosity.
And we want to give a big shout out and thank you to Hiwassee Products for sponsoring Heart and Soil, partnering with Heart and Soil, and collaborating with Heart and Soil for the Soil Summit, Heart and Soil magazine, and a fantastic regenerative resource that we have coming out later this year. So thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Hiwassee Products.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Hopefully you get something out of this next hour and a bit, however long it is. So like Natalie said, I'm with a company called Hiwassee Products. We're basically trying to improve soil microbial health by providing equipment for farmers and some educational resources as necessary to help people kind of fix their own soils through building their own biological extracts. So there's a composting component to that. There's application components to that. Analyzing, evaluating microbes, that component. So the presentation that I'll do today is adapted from one I did for the U.S. Composting Council's conference. So that was kind of coming into this whole field from the perspective of mass producing compost as a way to recycle organic material. A lot of people in the composting world, that's what they think about, is just how do we recycle organic waste, keep it out of landfill. They don't know that much about the back end of the process and how that can be used in agriculture. And kind of going from compost to soil health applications is a bit of a narrow, we're going to go kind of deeply into a narrow aspect of soil health, of which there are many aspects.
Jesse, what excites you most about compost?
Well, I think it's exactly what we'll talk about is the life within compost and the ability to translate that into the life in the soil and the implications for plant and crop health. Very good. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so first of all, when we talk about soil health, I think it's very important to define what exactly we're talking about. So a lot of folks conventionally look at soil as a chemical medium in which plants are grown. And when we talk about health, it's important to understand health is a quality of a living organism or an ecosystem, a group of organisms. So we're really talking about the life in the soil when we say soil health to begin with. So what does the life in that soil consist of? Well, you have your plants, obviously their roots are what are down in the soil, and then all of the microbial activity around those plant roots, starting with bacteria, fungi, and working up through the soil food web, which we'll talk about in a moment, to eventually include organisms that we can see, beetles, earthworms, and birds and mammals, etc. So that whole ecosystem in the soil, that's really what we're talking about when we talk about soil health. If that ecosystem is present, the soil has life and is able to produce the benefits to the plants and crops. The things that we've done kind of conventionally without realizing it to negatively impact soil health, they're kind of obvious if you think about it. If you're tilling, that's a mechanical disruption to the ecosystem in the soil. If you're doing a lot of chemical injections, you're disrupting it that way. If you are fallowing your soil and basically eliminating all plant life, not only are you eliminating the plants' roots from the soil, but a lot of the microbes that depend on the plants, you're losing as well. And with a lot of the degradation of soil structure through erosion or compaction, negatively impacts the life in the soil as well. So all these things have kind of been the byproducts of our what we call conventional agriculture. So kind of turning that around to focus on soil health through farming. You've probably all seen lists of soil health principles and how to implement them. But it's kind of, you're looking at it from the other way around. How do we protect the life in the soil? Well, we're going to limit the disturbance, either mechanically or through chemicals, so that ecosystem is protected. We need to keep living plants in the soil because their roots feed the soil ecosystem. And in many cases, it's necessary to actually reapply the microbial life to the soil because of how much it's been lost. And that's kind of where we come in with our equipment and the process around it to get those microbes back into the soil. So that's kind of what we'll focus on, is that process of reestablishing microbial communities in the soil. I'll go through all this stuff fairly quickly. I'm going to assume a fair bit of knowledge of all this stuff, and it's not hard to find other resources online that go deeper into all these different things. But again, a basic understanding of how plants work within the ecosystem. They need nutrients to be healthy, just like all other organisms, but unlike mobile organisms, they can't go and forage for the nutrients they need. They need to get them through the soil, through their roots. So the way to acquire those nutrients through their roots, they depend on the microbial community, especially for the micronutrients, the things that provide their crops with antioxidants and flavonoids and other health promoting hormones. The plant wants to have it itself. It wants to pass it on to its progeny, its crops, which are what we eat. So that makes us healthier when those things are present. And really, without the microbes in the soil, the plants aren't um, taking up those micronutrients and making themselves healthier that way. So at the same time, the plant is using photosynthesis to produce root exudates to feed the microbes. And that's how a lot of carbon sequestration is happening through the actual plant's digestive functions. The root zone is building out, exudates are being produced, microbes are coming in and consuming them. The microbes are expanding in population. A lot of carbon is being sequestered in the bodies of the microbes themselves, and then, on up the food chain. Speaking of the food chain, there's a graphic on the bottom right that illustrates the soil food web that, of course, Dr. Elaine Ingham is famous for popularizing, showing how, you have your tinier microbes, bacteria, fungi are then consumed by larger microbes, which are consumed by larger organisms, and, so on up to the point where you can actually see life above the ground. If there's a lot of birds, a lot of insects, bats, spiders, they're there because of the life below the ground and the soil food web being built from the ground up. And then, of course, the other benefit of soil microbes is as they're building that ecosystem around the plant's roots, they're aggregating the soil. They're building that spongy structure that's able to infiltrate and hold water in the soil, facilitate oxygen and carbon dioxide flow through the soil, et cetera. So, a myriad of soil health benefits from these microbes. So the question then is how to get that going in the soil if it's not currently present to begin with. So again, coming in from the composting side, there's a lot of different ways to make compost. Again, if you're primarily concerned with taking organic waste, whether that's things like carbon-rich materials, wood chips, leaves from tree companies and so on, how to cycle those back in, whether it's food waste, whether it's manure, bedding from livestock operations. A lot of different things come together to make compost, and it's a very, very variable process. All those different things that I have as questions there affect the end product of the compost. How much aeration is going on, the temperature of the compost, whether or not there's pathogenic microbes that are being consumed or are they proliferating, how much carbon, how much nitrogen, what's the moisture level. All these different things affect the quality of compost. And really, before I get into the microbiological quality of the compost, I should mention there are many benefits to just using bulk compost in agriculture for soil health. A lot of farmers will just spread it, especially if they have the materials themselves, manure that's broken down, just spread that out there. There's some benefit to that. It will feed the microbial life. It will protect the surface layer of the soil, hold in moisture, all those things. I kind of want to focus more on the microbial quality of the compost and how that can directly affect the biology within the soil, especially down in the root zone of the plants. So I'm kind of ignoring the benefits of top dressing bulk compost to get more into the microbial side of things. So if you're trying to compost specifically for the microbes that the plant wants down in the soil, there may or may not be a lot of benefits depending on what type of composting you're doing. So kind of the main takeaway, because composting is so variable, just because you're doing composting doesn't mean you're going to have a product with a lot of quality microbes that the plants want to have in the soil. You kind of need to address that through more specific practices to arrive at that microbial quality. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, the kind of the simplest, easiest starting way to do that is through vermicomposting. The reason for that is that worms can digest a wide array of organic material, so they can basically consume anything. You don't have to worry too much about what you're feeding them as long as it's not harmful to them specifically. And through their digestive process, they are inoculating their castings, their poop with their egesting, with beneficial microbes that the plant wants in the soil. We'll dive a little bit more into how we know that. But if you think about the role of worms within the ecosystem, they're tunneling down through the soil, they're consuming microbes, they're consuming organic matter in the soil, and then they're leaving their castings behind. So they're really cycling nutrients, cycling microbes in the soil. And that's, because that's their function, it kind of makes sense that if you're doing this vermicomposting process, even though it's outside the soil, the product that you are left with is beneficial to re-inject into the soil. So who are these microbes and what are they doing? Basically, they are producing these plant promoting compounds, and there's ways of analyzing worm castings to see these compounds in action. Humic and fulvic acids, some of these things are even produced commercially. You can inoculate them into the soil, but they're actually found in worm castings. Gibberellins help seeds germinate. Vermicompost is a very, very powerful additive for starting seeds. Auxins, cytokinins are things that help produce plant growth and also reproductive growth, which is around the crops, specifically. There's a lot of sticky substances within worm castings. If you stick your hand into a bulk worm casting, it's going to come away sticky. So there are those compounds that help aggregate the soil in there as well. I talked about the biomimicry of basically taking what the worms are doing in the soil, doing it in a high concentration so that you have this, thick material to then get back into the soil in your agricultural applications. Okay, here's some of the science behind it. We've borrowed heavily from Dr. Zach Jones, who does DNA sequencing. He runs a company called AgriGoData. And a number of years ago, he did this project where he collected about 30 different samples of vermicompost from all across the country, all different feedstocks. You can see the different feedstocks there on the graphic, and kind of analyze them all to sort of see what are the highest distributions and representations of microbes kind of throughout the different samples, which would kind of show, as the worms are inoculating these castings, what are you going to get regardless of your feedstocks? So he has a lot of different bacterial strains that he was able to detect, and they you can see what they produce, what kind of compounds they produce, and the role that they play within the ecosystem. Some are nitrogen fixers, some are recyclers of certain things. His entire research is pretty fascinating. I kind of just have a sample of it here. But the main takeaway is no matter what you're feeding your worms, because of that digestive process, the castings are containing the bacteria that are performing these functions that play a direct role in plant health. You can go wrong, but if you're doing vermicomposting correctly, you can't go wrong as far as producing a powerful soil amendment. So then what is the difference between compost and vermicompost? These are samples that I took using the microbiometer tool, which doesn't give you a lot of details, but gives you a quick, basically your total microbial biomass in your samples, and then also your fungal to bacterial ratio. So it gives you those two metrics. So I kind of compared, there's an urban farm here in Chattanooga that does what you would kind of consider standard municipal composting. Another company actually does it on their site, but then they use the compost. And that's the sample on the left there. It's fairly typical of what you see. The microbial biomass 237 is a pretty normal number. Anywhere 200 to 300 is kind of normal for compost. Fungal to bacterial, you can see it's quite bacterial dominant, 0.4 to 1 ratio there. And they were sourcing actually some really, really good commercial worm castings. So I sampled the compost they were using and the vermicompost they were using. And you can see the difference. That middle sample is their worm castings. You can see the microbial biomass is 5 times what their normal compost was, and the fungal to bacterial ratio is quite high. Not all vermicompost is that fungal dominant, and some is a lot more. There is some variability there, but very, very good fungal content for those castings. And then just for fun, I took my, the vermicompost that I'm producing at home, nothing fancy, just my household food waste and leaves and so on. A little bit of pre-composting process and then feed that to my worms. And so this is just stuff I'm doing in my backyard, very minimal effort. And you can see the numbers are fairly comparable to a commercial vermicompost product. In fact, total biomass is roughly the same. Fungal to bacterial, roughly the same. So the takeaway from that is you can produce home vermicompost that is comparable to commercial vermicompost and way better in terms of microbial content than standard compost. Okay, so now getting more into the actual applications here, going from the production of high quality microbial compost through vermicomposting. How do you actually use it? So this was one thing I was going to mention when I talked about top dressing compost. That works well if you have a smaller acreage and you're able to just get compost out on the soil. A lot of the farmers that we're working with have huge operations, thousands of acres, and it doesn't make sense to try to acquire enough compost to do those massive top dressing applications. So efficiency is a very big concern. And here again, converting your compost from a bulk material to a material that's more higher microbial quality, you can stretch it a lot farther. So if you're using vermicompost in its solid form, usually that's done at a potting mix or as you're planting your plants. Dig a hole, throw in some vermicompost, plop your plants in. A little bit goes a long way. So again, it's very effective at the root zone. You want to get it down in the soil where it can be around the roots of the plants. So if you're doing a bare root or plug planting or starting seeds, those are all good ways to mix in vermicompost. And really about 10 to 20% of the material mass, sometimes not even, can make a very big difference. You don't want to overdo it. You're not planting your plants into vermicompost. That's going to be too powerful. But then again, as far as efficiency goes, using that compost to make a liquid application is the best way to get it spread out over larger acreage, to get the microbes from the compost into a liquid that can be easily applied down into the root zone as opposed to just a top dressing. So this is kind of one of the new horizons for soil health is making compost extracts. And number one, getting a compost with a good microbial content, because your extract is only going to be as good as your compost. But then getting the microbes out into the liquid and getting it down into the soil. Many of the farmers we work with are doing an in-furrow. I guess I should mention these are annual row crops. As you plant the seeds in the ground, which most people are doing now with a seed drill, you're injecting a squirt of compost extract with the seed so that, again, it can germinate with those microbes around it and then continue to feed the roots as the plant grows. Fertigation is a good way also, especially for annual crops where you're not disturbing the soil to plant. But if you have an irrigation system, you can get the extract down into the soil. It's also good as a foliar spray, which can protect the leaf surfaces from ambient pathogens. We've seen remarkable case studies where um, the pathogens might be present and they might be affecting, the farms around you. But if your plants are protected either systemically through, their nutrient derived from the soil, um, or if their leaves are protected with spraying these microbes onto the leaves, the pathogens can be there and the plants aren't affected, or not as much. Um, okay, so this is kind of our little brag sample of broccoli here in the picture. So we were just making extract to prototype our first extractors, and there was a local garden that said, hey, you guys need a place to dump this. I'll take it. I'm going to plant broccoli, just drench the soil. This was even before the plants were put into the soil. And this is how the broccoli came up. I mean, literally zero. You can find holes from moth damage, but they're pretty hard to find and they don't affect the plant at all. And those heads of broccoli are the size, there's a watering can there so you can see, the size of the heads. And again, this was not even an intentional application. It was just kind of let's dump down extract where we're going to plant plants. And this is, the results that we got. So the difference between extract and tea, compost extract, compost tea, there's rabbit holes you can dive down if you're more interested, but just at a high level, extract means you're just pulling the population of microbes out into a liquid and then putting that out without expanding the population in the liquid. I have some data on the next slide that shows the difference between the microbial population between extract and tea, but with tea, you are expanding the overall population of microbes, but what actually happens is there's just a handful of bacterial strains, depending on what you feed them, that populate. So if you want to preserve the biodiversity of the original compost, extract will do that better. And so where you want that is typically in the soil. We like to say extract for soil applications, tea for foliar applications. That's not a hard and fast rule, but kind of worth thinking about. Compost tea, if you are adding oxygen and food, kind of bubbling, brewing to expand the microbial population, there's a certain time period you do that in. When you've hit that time period, you need to apply it right away, or the pathogenic bacteria can start taking over. Extract you can store for a certain amount of time. And what our customers are typically doing, again, in those infra applications, they're doing 1 pound of vermicompost and 4 gallons of extract, and they're doing 2 gallons per acre. Again, it's a very small targeted application, 1 squirt per seed as they're putting it in there. So a little bit really goes a long way. So that's 2 pounds of vermicompost per acre. Compare that to what your top dressing compost would be. So this is far more efficient. So here's more data from Zach Jones, DNA sequencing, comparing a vermicompost on the left to an extract from that compost in the middle to a tea from that compost on the right. The different colors and different segments, which you can't really read, just shows that the biodiversity of the bacteria. And you can see the extract in the middle looks almost identical to the original vermicompost. So when you're making an extract, which stands to reason, you're just pulling the microbes from the vermicompost into the extract. That's what your extract looks like. It was kind of interesting to see what the tea sample looked like because, you're trying to expand the population of microbes, but really there's just a few strains of bacteria that actually expand and multiply out. And again, they're beneficial ones. You're just not getting that full biodiversity, represented in your tea population. So with a foliar application, what you're trying to do is coat your leaf surfaces with beneficial microbes so that they outcompete the pathogens. So there's no reason not to use tea for that. It'll stick well. It's a lot stickier than extract, and it'll just keep the pathogens off the leaves. I cannot see the clock on my computer, Natalie. What am I doing time-wise?
Yeah, time is good. It's 9:41.
Left?
9:41. So you have like half an hour left or so, or more.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm in Eastern, so it's a different time zone.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
No worries. Okay, good. Because all this stuff, I'm trying to give a very surface level. Any one of these things are rabbit holes that people can do any amount of research on. I was kind of looking specifically at vermicomposting. Johnson Su composting is a whole different, a whole other way to compost for microbial health. Dr. Johnson will say that it is a method of vermicomposting because you are adding worms in, but it's really about expanding the fungal quality. I kind of imagine most people here know about Johnson Su composting or can look it up. You basically have a static mass of carbon heavy material that, because of the design of the bioreactor, oxygen flow can happen throughout the entire mass of the material. You're going to keep it nice and moist, and you're going to give it a year to break down, and fungi will populate and break down this material. And at the end, you have a compost that is full of beneficial fungi. The downside is the volume constraints of this process. But I know quite a few people that make Johnson Su compost and then use it to inoculate their other compost or their vermicompost and are able to get a higher volume of that fungi out through that inoculation process. And there's also people that just make Johnson Su compost and then use it in their extracts. Korean natural farming, I am all these kinds of things. Indigenous microorganisms are other ways to cultivate microbes, and then you can use those to inoculate other composts. If you want specific trace mineral nutrients, adding them to your vermicomposting and having the worms process those and have them appear in your worm castings is a good way of doing that, because the worms will be chelating those nutrients into plant available form as part of that process. So you're then applying them, in a plant available form. Biochar is something that's getting an awful lot of publicity. A good way to inoculate your biochar is to add it into your vermicomposting operation. And for one thing, if you're monitoring the moisture of your vermicompost, your biochar will, it will soak up all the moisture it needs. And then when it goes out in the soil, it's not soaking in moisture from the soil around it, which is one hesitation. And it'll be inoculated with microbes, and it's not going to pull microbes in from the soil around it. So some farmers are concerned about just applying dry biochar to the soil because of that effect. But that's a good way to mitigate it, is to add it into your vermicomposting operation. If you want stuff like chitin, you can add that into it as well. And then all of this just improves the overall quality of your compost. And then when you're going to make your extract or your tea, adding microbial foods to help those microbes expand. Either in a tea, you're doing that in the liquid before you apply it. In an extract, you're adding those foods so that the microbes can multiply in the soil afterwards. You're helping them get established and then multiply in the soil. So things like molasses, kelp powder, fish hydrolysate are all common microbial foods that are used. Okay, let's talk about a few case studies. We are compiling more and more of these, and it's exciting to see just in the few years since we've been a business, these practices are exploding. So it's been pretty fun to circle back to our customers, a year or so after they start doing extracts and find out what their results have been. And um, it's new enough that we don't have a ton of longer term case studies. So a lot of what I'll show you is just within the first couple of years of doing this. In 5 years from now, we'll have, um, longer time period case studies, which should really give a better idea. But here is a muscadine vineyard in North Carolina. These are muscadines for table grapes. So they are doing both composting and vermicompost extracts. They're kind of doing all of the above. So they're collecting carbon materials that are available from their local economy and feeding the soil that way from the top. And then you can see they have an aerated static pile system of how they are composting their own materials. They're doing Johnson Su composting, they're doing vermicomposting, so they're really doing the full gamut. And then they're making an extract with both their Johnson Su and vermicompost, and then applying that out through the irrigation system in their vineyard. So that's one example. This is Corey Miller. Natalie, have you done an interview with Corey?
Not yet.
Yeah, he'd be an interesting one to get because he's
Yes.
done a lot of. He's very familiar with the soil food web stuff. He's done the soil food web course. He does microscopy, so he can really talk the talk on microbes. But he has a ranch out in Missoula, Montana, and his operation is mostly hay, which he sells at a premium to. There's a lot of horse farms in his area. And then he also has one pivot where he's doing sod, and then he's right outside. He's almost inside the city of Missoula, which is expanding rapidly post-COVID. And a lot of the new homeowners, he's selling sod to them, and then he contracts with them to maintain their sod with extracts. So he's very entrepreneurial. It's a lot of fun to talk to him. But he's doing everything that he's doing just with compost extracts, mostly with Johnson Su compost that he makes himself. And then he is also making bulk compost that he inoculates with the Johnson Su compost. So a lot of different compost applications in one place. Okay, this is shameless plug for our YouTube channel. We've done a few video interviews on site. We did one with Corey. We did one with Douglas Poole, this farm here in Central Washington, where he's doing dryland wheat, and dryland meaning 6 to 8 inches of rain annually. And his soil, his land looks like this. It's super rocky. He has 13 landlords because 12 other farmers around him all quit farming. So he's now working their land. So he's now doing extract with his wheat. And you can see the insert there. That's a 2-week-old wheat plant. Again, it was seeded with compost extract in furrow. And you can see the root development on that 2-week-old plant is pretty incredible. And the microbes have created their own habitat right around the roots of that plant, symbiotically with the plant. But they've created their own environment there with the way that the soil is aggregated and the particles are stuck together. And then here's another farm in Iowa. Again, this was their first year doing extracts, so it's kind of funny when you talk to people and they have anecdotal stuff and they kind of hem and haw, but they said, yeah, I mean, everyone around us sprayed for Gauss's wilt and we didn't have to. So, there you go. But again, here the insert, you can see the corn plants just after planting. The root development is pretty incredible. So these are all farmers that started down the soil health path. They're all doing things like cover cropping where they can, including livestock where they can, all those soil health principles. But the making compost extracts and adding microbes to the soil, is kind of an extra shot in the arm. It it kind of amplifies those other practices. Those other practices can take some time to really get a full healthy soil ecosystem established. And so getting the microbes into the soil helps that happen faster. It also helps you kind of mitigate if you are going to be doing some tillage, if you are going to be doing some nitrogen fertilizer, or you plan to still do some pesticide applications. Not all farmers are 100% on the regen train, but extracts are something that they can incorporate to, let's say you're doing something that isn't the best for the health of your soil, adding microbes in on an annual basis can help mitigate some of those things. So that's kind of what I had prepared to talk about. Obviously, very surface level on a lot of these things. We are working on getting more educational stuff out there, more of these case studies. They're on our YouTube channel. We're going to be working with Heart and Soil this year on putting together a regenerative resource around compost extracts, looking at the background science of soil microbes. What are they doing in the soil? Why do you want them? How can you get them in the soil by doing vermicompost, by doing extracts, and talking with some of the experts in the field, and then getting some of these case studies together. Collecting data is a little bit of a challenge because farmers are busy, and if they believe in something, then they're happy. They don't need to try to evangelize other people. But there are some that we're getting to know that are collecting data, and we're kind of excited to share that as it becomes available. So anyway, who are we as a company? Having talked about all of this, we're basically trying to develop equipment so that farmers or consultants can do this stuff, put it into practice, basically overcoming the equipment barrier to implementing these practices. So we kind of have three product lines currently. One is our HPAC system. The bottom left there is basically kitting together everything you need to do soil microscopy analysis. If you're taking Dr. Elaine's the Soil Food Web course or Matt Powers course, or just want to see what's going on in the soil, it's everything you need all kitted together in drawers. Everything can collapse and pop onto a hand truck, so you can easily ship it around. If you're a consultant that has clients, you can take the lab to the field and look at stuff on farm. There's a hard shell case kind of custom made for the LW scientific microscopes that most folks in the field like to use. So you can carry your microscope around without worrying that you can even fly with it. Simeon does that all the time, our soil guy. So that's one side. So you can see what's going on in the soil. Do you need more microbes? What microbes do you need? Do you need more fungi? Maybe you need to do more fungal composting. Then the top right is our vermicomposting system. We kind of designed it to fill the gap between smaller homeowner systems, which you can find on Amazon, and larger modular systems that are mostly used by commercial vermicomposting operations that are producing castings for sale. So our system is 4 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and is kind of an ideal size for a smaller farm system, a market farm, or 5 to 10 acres. You can probably produce all the castings you'll need on an annual basis. Larger farms like to source bulk castings anyway. They don't want to make their own vermicompost. So we kind of made one size. It's operated with a cordless screwdriver, the harvesting mechanism, and there's only so big of a system you can make that you can have a non-electrical system designed for. So we kind of made one size, and if your operation falls under the size that it makes sense for, makes sense for you. But then with our compost extractors down in the middle there, which we produced one, kind of the first generation iteration a couple of years ago, got it out in the field, found out where the improvements were necessary, and then made our second generation, designed it, rolled it out this past winter in 3 different sizes. So the smaller size could be for a smaller off-grid farm where there's no motorized mechanical components. You run the auger just with a hand crank. And as long as you can get 40 psi water pressure, you can make extract totally off grid. And then our larger model can produce about 700 gallons an hour. And then we have one model in between that has a lot of different configurations. And so the idea was to get a wide price range in there, as well as a different range of functionality, so that more people are able to produce extracts. So we'll keep trying to see, where the hurdles are, where the pain points are for people implementing these practices on different scales. So anyway, that is who we are and what we're doing and where we fit kind of within the entire industry. So I guess, Natalie, I can use the rest of the time for questions. Do you want me to drop off the screen share?
Yes, that was awesome, Jesse. Thank you. It was a great bird's eye overview, and you took us deep enough that I think there are insights that everyone could glean from and grow from. So thank you for that.
Be sure to go and check out Hiwassee products online. They have everything from compost extractors to compost, microscopes, and vermicompost bins. They can be found on the web at hiwasseeproducts.com. That's HIWASSE products.com. And on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, it's Hiwassee Products. HIWASSEE products.
There are a couple of questions. One is, this is a good question. I've never had this question before. It's from Monica. Monica asks, regarding soil testing, if she were to test her garden soil, will it tell her the presence or absence of worm castings? And if so, can it tell me what species those castings came from? Do you know the answer to that, Jesse?
As far as testing, will it tell me the presence, absence of worm castings? It will. The tools that we have available now, you can. The most detailed, put it that way, is the DNA sequencing that Zach Jones and Laura Kavanaugh and others are doing, which will tell you which bacterial strains you have, and it won't necessarily tell you where those things come from. I mean, the easiest answer for that is dig a hole and see if there's worms. If you have good soil health, you will have worms. You start with the microbes, and then, as the soil food web expands from there, worms are. Ray Archuleta calls them the keystone organisms because they're easy to see. You can see at a glance if they're there. If they're there, you have healthy soil. Mm-hmm. Which species? I don't know specifically. There are 3 types of worms. And actually, the interesting thing is the worms you use for composting, red wigglers and the like, they're called epigeic. They are basically litter feeders. So if you were to leave a pile of leaves on the ground and come back a few months later and comb through it and find worms, that's the type of worms that are digesting that organic material at the surface. They're very easy for vermicomposting because they go through stuff very, very quickly. They digest litter quickly. They reproduce like crazy, and they stay at the surface. So you can easily, add your material to the top, harvest from the bottom. So they're actually a different kind of worm than the ones that are down burrowing in the soil. But the digestive process is similar enough. The castings are similar enough. The microbes that the worms are inoculating are similar enough. Beyond that, I don't know. I should mention on anything worm related or vermicomposting related, our go-to resource is the Worm Farmer's Handbook by Rhonda Sherman. Rhonda Sherman was a researcher at NC State for many years. She recently retired. Her book is excellent. Will tell you everything you need to know about vermicomposting. And there's a lot of biology in the worms in there as well. So
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. And also, there's Rob Blakemore, who's been studying worms for over 40 years, will tell us that there's over 7,000 species of earthworms and more are being discovered. So that just kind of blows my mind. Who knew, right? Who knew? I'm sure, as little kids, an earthworm is an earthworm. Although I remember seeing lots of different earthworms and going, oh, and noticing the differences between some of them. Some of them go really, really long, and some of them are like more short and squiggly. Those are the leaf eaters that you're talking about, the red wrigglers. All right, next question is from Chris. How can we make extracts at home?
yeah, great question. There are a few different ways, and there are. I'm trying to think off the top of my head who the best voices in the field are. I think Diego Footer does this, Troy Hinkie. Depending on what you're trying to get and how you're trying to apply it. So I have a permaculture orchard in process, and what I do is I just have a trough. I dump the castings in. I fill it with water. I hit it with a paint paddle on a cordless drill, mix it up, and I'm basically making more of a slurry than an extract, and then I'll just dump that down because I want the solid stuff as well. If you're trying to exclude it, like if you're trying to put it through an irrigation system or something, then you have to filter it somehow. And so a lot of people will put the compost in a mesh bag and then just drop it down into a bucket of water and, milk it, just work the material. Um, and you'll see the water getting browner and browner and the microbes are making their way out of the bag into the liquid. So it's really easy. There's a lot of easy ways. The difficulties come in trying to scale up. But depending on how you're trying to apply it, it could be just as simple as making a slurry, just stirring it in a bucket of water,
Mhm.
and
That's
you'll
great.
get the benefits.
That's great. Great tips. Thank you. Thank you, Jesse. Timothy asks, do you know much about the problem of forever chemicals that he's reading more and more about and how they're starting to see more and more for forever chemicals? For example, a lot of people in his area are using malorganite that they use in their gardens that may show up in your composting. So I guess maybe what do you know about them and what do you know about um, those actually being able to go away? And are they forever? Do you know?
I want to say because we're kind of coming at composting from the ag side. We're starting from soil health and working towards composting. I know this is a huge concern for composters, for people who are collecting organic materials and composting and then trying to see, do I have heavy metals? Do I have a lot of glyphosate? Do I have, if I'm getting horse manure, are there a lot of antibiotics and so on that are going to harm the microbes? I don't I don't know much beyond it's definitely worth knowing where your materials are coming from if you're composting. And then again, because we're mostly working with farmers that are making extracts, um, so do those chemicals make their way into the liquid or do they stay more in the solid material that's, a waste product when you're making an extract? I don't really know enough to give any real advice.
Mhm. Yeah, and I do know some of this information, but it's not in my brain at this moment. Well, it is just like filed away. So there, maybe in our follow-up email to this interview, Leslie, we'll just note some of the interviews that we've done on that, and also maybe we can actually just do a complete, like a whole session on that That would be really cool because there are ways to actually compost and burn up those quote unquote forever chemicals. So another question, any specific recommendations for very sandy soil, like 88% sand, a heavier solid VC rate, a vermicasting rate? She feels like liquid will just drain through that soil quickly.
Yeah, I do know some people that kind of contend with that, especially if you're down in Florida or somewhere like that. You definitely getting more organic material in the soil will help. So this could be, when you're planting, um, have your solid VC rate probably. Um, the Again, the root development, like you saw on those wheat plants and corn plants, that's going to help create that rhizosheath, people like to call it, around the plant's roots, which is basically that's the plants and the microbes working off each other to create that kind of aggregation. Um, so I think you would probably see more drainage of your extract, so probably making things more concentrated and trying to add more organic material would make more of a difference. Um,
Yeah, I think Chris might have been a gardener too. It depends on if you're a gardener or if you're a farmer, if you're dealing with like a small garden or if you're dealing with thousands of acres as well, of different strategies you might want to use. The corn tip's super awesome. I've heard lots of success around that one. Elias asks, he says he has 100 access to about 100 plus pounds of organic veggie and fruit pulp a day from some local juicers, and he currently collects a few dozen pounds every couple of weeks for his 4x8 worm bin, and he mixes it with shredded cardboard, and the worms love it, and the population is growing and slowly able to accommodate more and more every month. He's wondering if you have any recommendations on how he can use more of the pulp for quick composting without attracting pests, and what would be a good carbon source to mix with this because he wouldn't be able to shred enough cardboard. Haha.
yeah. Um, as far as a composting system, um, and I'm sitting here thinking of people that are better to answer this question than me, who are more on the composting side. Really cool interview just a few weeks ago with Sundiata L in Tallahassee, Florida, with the NCAT, the National Center for Appropriate Technology, Institute for Local Self-Reliance, does a lot of stuff around smaller scale composting systems. The best thing I've seen is the aerated static pile, where you have, speaking of carbon, you're using wood chips and then you're just blowing oxygen through regularly, gets high temps up very quickly. I would think, you're putting wood chips down over the it's like PVC pipes with holes, and then put your heavy fruit stuff on top of that, cover that again with more carbon, let the oxygen do its thing. That would break stuff down quickly. Um, if leaves are, I use a lot of leaves. If you can get leaves, they are,
Mm.
and you mostly can. I mean, people throw them out or burn them, but they break down. I have a barrel where I collect all my fall leaves in. And I've got drain holes in the bottom, and it just breaks down. Keep it wet from let the rain fall on it, and it breaks down into this super sticky. Leaves have amazing microbiology um, in them for starters. So it's not just the carbon side; you're also getting the microbes.
Mhm, mhm.
Which, if you're doing a hot composting system, you're going to lose anyway. But whatever.
Yeah, you could partially break that. I think what I'm hearing is you can actually start to partially break that down in a compost pile and then feed that to the worms before it's fully broken.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and the worms love that too. They go through it faster. So this is a really good question from Jean, and I think you you, you work with farmers who are transitioning from chemical farming. So and so I'm going to ask this if you just have any insights of what's working really well for other farmers that you've seen using the compost extracts. Um, Jean is taking he's taking a 6-year-old field of alfalfa hay out of production without using glyphosate. And so he's wondering um, how to do that.
6-year-old field of alfalfa out of production. As in terminating?
Yeah, I think so. So Jean, you says, how do you take a 6-year-old field out of alfalfa hay of alfalfa hay out of production without using glyphosate if the question does not, okay. So without turning it because you're wanting to do no-till, I'm guessing, Jean. If you want to raise your hand, you're more than welcome to. Unless, do you have an answer to that, Jesse, of what you see people doing?
I don't know, not specifically. I mean, if we knew what we were aiming for,
Yeah.
you're converting a hayfield to a pasture, for instance. And I'm not the best person to answer that.
We need more information, Jean. And then also, Jean, come into one of the regenerative warrior sessions and we can do some more just coaching with you around this and help you with it more specifically. Uh, Rosalind asks if you sell red wrigglers.
Yes, we do. I'm reading the comment, and great to meet you virtually. Jeff is a good friend of mine. We do. We don't we don't grow them ourselves. We basically we're trying to focus on equipment, but we are trying to set people up for success. So people have kind of asked us to source things like bulk compost or worms, things like that. So we do have bulk red wigglers on our website. There's other places you can get them as well, but you can get them from us if you want.
Awesome. This is a great question. It's about the difference between extract and tea. So they say, I was under the impression that one of the main benefits of making compost tea rather than extract is that the microbes are exposed to nutrients such as kelp and fish hydroxylate, which then becomes plant available in the finished tea. Can you talk about the symbiotic relationship between plants and microbes? Such a good question.
I'm sorry, I'm first trying to. Yes, so the using kelp and fish hydrolysate to feed the microbes, and then the nutrients that are in there are available. The difference between tea and extract isn't a tea that's happening kind of in the liquid ahead of time. So that's most of those foods are actually being consumed by the microbes before they go into the soil. In an extract, they're going into the soil and consuming the foods there while they're in the soil. So honestly, I don't know that there's a huge difference between the actual applications of both in terms of how the microbes survive, how big the population gets based on how much food you're adding, whether that happens before application or after application. The symbiotic relationship between plants and microbes, I mean, the scientific research that we have now, I actually just did an interview with Dr. James White. If you haven't seen his stuff on rhizophagy, it's mind-blowing. How plants actually absorb microbes into the plant tissue, break the microbe cell walls with their enzymes, extract the nutrients, and then expel the microbes out through their root hairs. In fact, create the root hairs by expelling the microbes back into the soil. That's kind of the how that it happens. Broadly, the networks that microbes create in the soil, and fungi play a big role in this because they create this network that spreads, right? The fungal hyphae can spread out in the soil. They're basically sourcing nutrients from the soil and delivering them back to the plant roots. So that's the kind of symbiotic relationship. The plants are producing exudates to feed the microbes. So the microbes colonize around the plant roots to feast on those exudates. And then in return, they are delivering nutrients from the soil to the plant. That's it in broad strokes. Dr. Lane would have a lot more details on that process as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, I was just reading a question that came in here, so I don't know if you answered this, Jesse, but um, nutrients are not always added to compost extracts and compost teas as well. Some people just make the compost tea or compost extract from the compost, and then apply that as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, to differentiate a little bit, the kelp, molasses, things like that are mixed in as microbial stimulants.
Hmm.
They're food for the microbes. So you're not thinking so much about the plants and the soil and so on as just getting the microbes going and populating, because they'll exhaust those foods at a certain point, and then hopefully by then they're established in the soil, and then they can go from there. The plants feeding them, and they can go from there. But yeah, it's if you're, I mean, a lot of farmers are thinking about how to combine applications. So if you need, like if you listen to John Kempf and people, and they talk about the importance of boron and calcium and those micronutrients, um, you can mix those into your extracts and add them as well, and that saves you a pass with the tractor or whatever.
Hmm. Hmm. And this is an interesting one. Monica asks, do you have any resources for jumping worms and hammerhead worms? This is what she's concerned or they're concerned about having in their soil. And they say they know they can see them, but they're concerned that about soil, like about getting soil and compost that has castings in it. So they're looking to keep those worms away. So what's your understanding about those jumping worms and hammerhead worms? Like, and how much truth is there to them?
I honestly haven't done a lot of research on that.
Okay.
I mean, so it's worth mentioning when you're doing a vermicomposting system like ours, a continuous flow process. One of the benefits of that is, I'm not sure if she meant to say castings or cocoons, the worm cocoons.
Yeah, I
But when
think
you
so.
have a continuous flow system, if you give it enough time for the worm cocoons, like their eggs, to hatch, and then the new little worms, um, will come up looking for food. So by the time you're harvesting castings at the bottom, there will probably be some worm activity. Um, but if you're using red wigglers, I've never had a problem with like populations of invasive worms or anything like that. I've never heard of that being a problem. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, you're usually pretty good. Thanks for this, Leslie. Dr. Rob Blakemore says worms are the solution for forever chemicals. They just like eat them and change them and poop out the gold.
Yeah, I mean the one thing I do know about like heavy metals in general, and I don't have the specifics off the top of my head, but um, microbes are able to bind those chemicals in a way that they're kept out of the plants. So you can have them in the soil, but they don't make their way into the plants. I don't have all of the data on that off the top of my head, but just like the worms are, collecting stuff the plant wants and providing it to the plants, they're also able to bind up stuff that the plant doesn't want and keep it away from the plants.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep, that's awesome. And Jean says, yes, they're currently using glyphosate to terminate their hay fields to plant wheat in the spring to do this.
Okay.
Yeah, and so this is where a different type of conversation, but it would be curious to know your insights around it, Jesse, because I think you have experience with this a little bit anyways, is like I think that's the one of the golden questions that people have. Like we hear that no till, like don't till because you're killing. But then we spray glyphosate on it. And so I'm curious about what you're seeing as like is turning that field under like with a plow or in a different way, is that favorable to using something like glyphosate on it before planting the wheat if they don't want to use the glyphosate?
Um, I would prefer the mechanical disturbance rather than the chemical because it's easier to bounce back from. I would say what we are seeing operationally from farmers that want to get away from glyphosate is they're planting an annual cover crop that's easy to terminate. So that then takes over. If you're starting with, let's say, a field that would be fallow to begin with, you're planting in like a winter cover crop that you terminate in the spring and then plant directly into that. So you basically have living roots in the soil until you're ready to plant your crop. Then you terminate it. You've got nice residue. You've got good organic material from the roots of those cover crops in the soil. And that's been the preference. It's a whole different operation. Now you're talking about seeding cover crops, crimping them, etc. But that I think is what we're seeing the most from people that need to plant on an annual basis, but don't want to till, don't want to use glyphosate.
Yeah, thanks for that insight, Jesse. And from having a bit of experience farming in the prairies and having hay fields of alfalfa and the things that you actually can't crimp, like I mean, you can, but they're just going to come back. Those alfalfa roots are like deep and massive. So we terminated it with mechanical. And that would be, I would really encourage you to try that too, Jean, if you have access to the equipment, to do the mechanical and then do the soil drenching with the extracts, and when you plant your wheat, and see how that goes. And you'll notice that you don't actually, I would say you don't need the glyphosate to kill off the hayfield, because my experience is, especially even if you don't have access to good compost or good quality microbes to put back in, your first year after coming out of a hay rotation like that, the weed pressure is really, really low. And partly it's because all the nutrients that hay has put into the soil, and then also the nutrients that you're putting back into the soil by turning those roots and the forage back into the soil. So I'm excited that what Jesse said echoes kind of my experience. But we can talk more about it in the membership area. Let's see, are there more questions? I have to go. Thanks for the informative session. Awesome.
Can I say something verbally?
Yeah, please do. Hi.
Just in relation to what I was asking about the difference between extract and tea.
Yeah.
My impression, especially when I look under the microscope, is the extract, yes, it is a representation of whatever compost or worm castings you're using. But when you make a tea, the microbes, because now they've got oxygen and they've got all these nutrients, they multiply by the billions in 24 hours.
Yes.
And then you have, when you look at that under the microscope, it's teeming with all this life that has all these plant available nutrients. So when I do the different tests, I do find the compost tea just is incredibly more powerful than an extract.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. I'm going to let Jesse share his insights on that, and then I'll add to that. And Jesse, you had a good slide that actually showed what happens, right, between a compost extract and a compost tea. You showed that multiplying. I don't know if that would be helpful to bring up and answer that question.
I saw that, but it was sort of counter to what I had always thought when I'm doing it. It looked like composting was limited to what was being multiplied.
It's not the overall microbes, it's the diversity of the microbes.
Right.
So if you feed molasses, there are certain bacteria that feed on molasses. They're the ones that are going to multiply, right? Not necessarily the ones that would eat something else.
That's why we don't feed them molasses.
That's right. my brother.
Plus you want to feed the bacteria and the fungi.
Have you seen fungi? This is a question that
Fantastic Fungi movie?
No. What I've seen a lot of stuff about bacteria multiplying in compost tea. Have you seen fungi multiply when you do compost tea?
That's a good question.
So
I do see very healthy strands, but it looks like they're not grow well. It's hard to tell.
Yeah.
Bacteria for sure, but I do find if you start with really high fungal compost or soil even, it will reappear and do really well in your tea.
Mhm, mhm.
And a lot of this is also there's a scale component to this. If I had, an acre or so, and I was anyway manually making either an extract or a tea, I think I'd be very attracted to making a tea because, it is thicker with those populations of microbes. With a lot of the people that we are working with, they're doing thousands of acres. There's an operational component. Tea, right, there's this window that you then have to apply it. If you're going to spend all day brewing a tea or making an extract, then you're going to spend all day applying it. By the time you're, 4 hours into applying compost tea, you know, um, maybe it's gone bad. So it's I think that's also why extract is an option that's more desirable at scale because it's just easier to work with and you can get those benefits. Again, if you're just looking at the tea and extract, absolutely there's going to be more microbes in the tea. But once you put them down in the soil with those microbial foods and that multiplication happens in the soil, um, that's where I think I don't know if it's necessarily a wash over time. Um, but put it this way, you can make an extract that can get you closer to the benefits of doing a tea, if you know what I mean.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, you're absolutely right about the multiplication of life and bacteria and microbes. And also what people, and I'm just going to echo what Jesse said here really quickly is there's less room for error when making compost extract. So you don't have that blooming of and expansion of microbes like you do in compost tea. Um, with so there's that deficit you could say or that difference, but with the extract, you're still getting all the really good things, and you're it's not going to go bad on you. It's just more it's safe for some people. So I think there's different. I don't necessarily think one is better or worse,
Yeah, depends what
good
you're
or
doing.
bad. They're both awesome, and it's really figuring out which system is going to work really well for you and your application, the land that you're stewarding. So because they're both brilliant processes and bring life into the soil. That's a very good question. Thank you. And just one more question, then we're going to wrap up. Elias says, is there any resource that shows recipes for compost tea, and I'll say and extracts, that will encourage different beneficials to multiply for different applications? So I think we're creating a resource with you, aren't we, Jesse? That maybe you'll have some recipes. We'll add those to the book.
I think that is a question about tea specifically, and the Troy Hinkie is someone I know who has a lot of experience with doing compost teas and could probably answer a question like that. And I bet if you looked him up on LinkedIn and messaged him, he would give you an answer. Troy, Hinke. Um,
Leslie can put his website here too.
yeah, Living Roots
He's
Compost
awesome.
Tea is his website. Again, because we've mostly done in extracts, I don't know. Um, I don't know the answer to that question, but Troy's somebody I know who has spent a lot of time trying to answer those types of questions because they're good questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. Well, with that, we are at the top of 90 minutes. That went by fast, and we had really good questions come in, and I feel inspired to make some compost extracts and use them on my fields and this year. And there's one question that I had when we were doing it that I've seen come up is with the starts, Jesse, if we don't have enough worm casting to be making our starts, like the soil that you use to make plant your seeds, could we just make it regular without the casting and then just drench them with a compost tea extract to help get that microbial life in them as well?
Yeah, you can. Mhm.
Okay, awesome.
Um,
So there's lots of different ways it can be used.
yep, yep.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for your time. Be sure to go and check out highwayseaproducts.com, and they have resources and they have all their systems there at their website that you can learn more about. If you have any more questions for Jesse, just reach out to myself and I'll pass his contact information to you, or you can reach out to him through highwayseaproducts.com. And we are delighted and excited and honored that you took the time to spend with us today, and we are committed to supporting you in your growth and in your journey as you steward your land and your soil, and you make compost and you harvest and you grow and you plant seeds and do all the things as we walk this journey together on planet Earth. So thank you, and thanks for all your lovely comments, Jesse. People loved this session, so thank you for your time of putting it together and sharing your insights and experiences. And we love worms. I love worms. And it was so nice to just amplify them and the incredible gift they are to this world and to the earth and to the soil and to our farms and gardens and plants. So thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. And Leslie, you have anything, lots of love for you coming into the chat. Thanks everybody for sharing that. And I just want to touch on a couple things that we touched on in the chat. Leslie has put in links all throughout the chat for different interviews that we've done with different people throughout the Heart and Soil time. And what's playing on the screen right now is actually a new offering from Heart and Soil, and that is from feedback from people like you in this room who just love being in the room together. And it is a Regeneration Warrior membership. And it's where we come together a couple times a month and we learn together and grow together. So they're live interactive sessions. Sometimes we're teaching about a concept or a principle, and then we do Q&A afterwards. We're going to be adding more coaching into them. So it's really a place where you can come and ask your questions and get support and say, hey, this is what I'm working on. How do I do it? Or where do I find this information? And we cover everything from branding and marketing and PR, like where are you going to sell your stuff and how do you find new markets, to how to grow food in your backyard, how to build your soil, how to make compost, how to get rid of the pests and all the different ways. And we really bridge conversations between biodynamics, using compost extracts, Korean natural farming, organic, regenerative practices. It's an all-encompassing experience. So you're welcome to check it out and come join us. It's just an awesome, awesome place. So if you like being in the room and you want more support, then we invite you to join us in the Regenerative Warrior membership. And then we have lots of events in the next week and a half or so. We have this interview with Jesse at 1 o'clock today. We are interviewing Rick Clark. I don't know if you know who Rick Clark is, but he's an award-winning farmer. He's farmed regeneratively and organically for a number of years. They farm over 7,000 acres certified organic. And I think, did I already say he's been in the documentary Common Ground as well? If you've seen that on Netflix, it's Kiss the Ground's second documentary. Common Ground. It's called Common Ground. It's a great insights into finding common ground in the regenerative space. And so he's coming in to talk about how he practices no-till organic farming on a large scale, and why he's chosen to take this path and how he's been really successful at it and finding his way through it all. How has he found his markets for the food that he's growing, and how has he done it successfully on that scale? So these are the insights we're going to be diving into with Rick Clark, and he's an awesome human. He's just so super cool, and he actually uses the Hiwassee extractor on his farm as a tool to make things easier to get good quality microorganisms into his large scale operations. And then we have another session on how to use a planting calendar on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. So you're welcome to come to that. It's free. Anyone can join. If you are curious about what this planting calendar is behind me here and how to use it, it's a great place to come and learn about it. It's because we all know the sun impacts our plants and how they grow. And somehow we have forgotten about the moon. And we know the moon impacts the high tide and low tide of the ocean. We know the moon impacts the menses of women around the world as we come together. We kind of all end up cycling at the same time. And so, and what research has shown us is the moon also impacts the way our seeds germinate. It impacts the way our roots grow. And if you listen to like our elders, some elders will say never plant on a new moon. Like we just don't do that because and maybe the stories are getting lost of why we don't do that. And research is showing us that there is some truth to those old tales from our elders. And there's reasons they said don't plant on a full moon. It's because they might not have had as much success. And research shows that it's true. So the celestial calendar helps us deepen into those really subtle rhythms. And truthfully, you you can be a really successful farmer or gardener not following the moon's rhythms. What happens though is for people who do learn about the rhythms of the sun and the moon and the planets, is they just notice that they're everything just runs a bit more smoothly, and the flavor of the food is more delicious, and the ecosystem just has more vitality in it. So it's not like the silver bullet to make everything better. It's just part of us deepening into connecting more deeply with the rhythms of nature and the ecosystem that we are living in and that we're stewarding. So that's the celestial planting calendar. And then we have a treat diving into a conversation with Molly Engelhart, and she had one of like a very, very famous vegan restaurant in LA. And one day she woke up, and it was probably over time, and not just she woke up, but she made the decision to take that vegan restaurant and turn it into a restaurant where she was going to serve regenerative, organic animal protein. And she got major backlash for it, and was raked through the coals. And now she is ranching with her brother in Texas, and they have Sovereignty Ranch. And so we're going to be having a conversation with her about moving from waste to wealth, and what and how that's all tied together with veganism and regenerative, and what they're doing on their ranch in Texas, and where they're sourcing different foods to feed their livestock, and all the things in between. It's really it's really cool what they're doing. So that's on Thursday with Molly. And then next week we have a member event, which is Know Your Soil, a deeper dive. We did Know Your Soil a few weeks ago, and we're learning about a whole bunch of just do-it-yourself soil testing that you can do at home, because a lot of people might not have a microscope, or they're not quite ready to make that jump to a microscope, or they have a microscope and they want to be able to identify, like, what does healthy soil feel like? What does it smell like? What does it look like? How fast does water run through it? What happens, like, what does it mean when I squeeze my soil or move it through my fingers? So that's what this Know Your Soil session is about do it yourself soil testing, so you can just get closer, a more deeper understanding of what your soil is. And then we also, on April 24th, which isn't on here, we're interviewing Chef Pete Evans, who is Australian, and he is devoted to being healthy every day. That's his motto, healthy every day. And he is committed to amplifying how important healthy food is, and not just healthy fresh food, but noticing where our food has been grown and how it's been grown. And he's committed to just spreading that message. So that is on Thursday, and that is a magazine interview as well. So you're welcome to join us, and we'd love to see you. have you in the room with us and bring your questions. If you have questions that you want to send in ahead of time, you're more than welcome to send those in as well.
So Natalie is speaking from the Pacific Daylight Time. So our next conversation with Rick Clark starts in 2 hours and 20 minutes. So the link is in the chat. It's also in your email. So we'd love to see you back with us in a couple hours.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Beautiful. Thank you for joining us this morning, my morning, some of yours afternoons, some of yours evenings, wherever you're joining us from the world. And we hope to see you back here in a couple hours, 2 hours and 20 minutes. Is that right? 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's going to be fun. Rick Clark, tell your friends, email your friends and your family and tell them, like, if you know anyone who's interested in farming regeneratively and organically, and or who's doing it or who wants to do it, this is a conversation to be at, because Rick shares openly and generously. So look forward to seeing you. Much love.